How Do You Like Them Apples? Good Will Hunting wasn't just a heartfelt drama about a troubled genius from South Boston. It was a brutal fight against Hollywood gatekeepers, a chaotic gamble that nearly collapsed, and a miracle of timing and raw emotion. Behind the polished, Oscar-winning script, the production was riddled with studio interference, rewrites, near firings, and bizarre accidents that shaped the final cut. Today we're peeling back the curtain on 20 weird facts about Good Will Hunting. From drunken writing marathons to Robin Williams' unscripted genius, and from sabotaged pitches to the unexpected cultural revolution it ignited. And wait until you hear the bonus fact, a hidden piece of the film that almost no one has ever noticed. Let's dive in. The script started as a college assignment. Good Will Hunting wasn't born in Hollywood. It started in a Harvard dorm room. Matt Damon originally wrote a short play for a dramatic writing class at Harvard. Instead of a polished script, it was a messy draft, focused mostly on therapy scenes. Damon expanded it with Ben Affleck after moving back to Boston. What began as homework turned into a massive 120-page screenplay. They weren't just dreaming, they were hustling. Affleck later recalled how they hammered out scenes late at night, fueled by beer and cigarettes. The script bounced between being a thriller, a romance, and even a government conspiracy story before settling into the character-driven drama we know today. The surprising truth? A film that feels so natural and inevitable began as a college experiment that professors barely noticed. From classroom scribbles to Hollywood history, it was a leap no one expected. Harvey Weinstein demanded the script be rescued. Hollywood didn't know what to do with Damon and Affleck's script. Castle Rock Entertainment bought it but sat on it, endlessly requesting rewrites that watered down the story. At one point, Castle Rock planned to give it to other writers entirely, essentially firing Damon and Affleck from their own creation. The project seemed doomed until Harvey Weinstein read it. Despite his later infamy, at that time Weinstein was seen as the savior of indie cinema. He immediately pulled the rights from Castle Rock and told Damon and Affleck, "You're making this movie and you're starring in it." This intervention preserved the film's authenticity, though it also tied its fate to Miramax. Without that decision, the story of Will Hunting might have been diluted into a generic drama, never capturing the raw Boston grit that made it iconic. The script included a fake sex scene to catch studio notes. Matt Damon and Ben Affleck were suspicious of Hollywood execs. They planted a trap inside their script, a completely out-of-place gay sex scene between Will and his therapist Sean. It had nothing to do with the plot, but they wanted to test whether studio executives were actually reading the material. Damon later laughed about it. Every meeting we had, no one brought it up. Except Harvey Weinstein. The first thing he said was, "I love the script, but what about that random sex scene?" We knew instantly he had read it. That prank wasn't just a joke, it was a survival tactic. In a world where scripts often get skimmed, it revealed who was serious about the story. The fake scene became Hollywood legend, proof that even young writers could outsmart the system. Robin Williams improvised the most famous scene. "It's not your fault." That line has broken audiences for decades, but here's the secret. It wasn't fully scripted. In the therapy room, Damon expected Robin Williams to follow the beats. Instead, Williams repeated, "It's not your fault," with increasing intensity, pushing Damon until his own emotions cracked. The tears weren't acting, they were real. Damon later admitted he didn't know how to react because Williams wasn't giving him a cue but rather forcing a human response. Director Gus Van Sant kept the cameras rolling, capturing lightning in a bottle. The improvisation transformed the film from smart indie drama to emotionally devastating classic. It wasn't just Williams' comic genius, it was his raw humanity, a willingness to abandon the script and go for truth. That scene is now etched in film history as one of the greatest unscripted moments ever filmed. The farting wife story was completely made up on the spot. One of Good Will Hunting's most beloved moments is when Sean, Robin Williams, tells Will about his late wife's quirks, how she used to fart in her sleep. The crew bursts out laughing, and if you watch closely, you'll notice Damon actually doubles over, trying to hide his face. That's because none of it was scripted. Williams improvised the entire story, weaving it into a tender memory. The laughter wasn't acting, it was real, the kind of corpsing that directors usually cut. But Gus Van Sant knew he had stumbled into gold. He kept the take, and it instantly humanized Sean, showing grief and humor could coexist. It wasn't a polished Hollywood moment, it was messy, real, and unforgettable. What audiences didn't know was that the laughter you hear in that scene is the sound of the crew breaking character in awe of Robin Williams. Mel Gibson almost directed the movie. Good Will Hunting wasn't always meant to be directed by Gus Van Sant. At one point, Mel Gibson, then fresh off Braveheart, was attached. Damon and Affleck were excited at first, imagining a sweeping epic. But Gibson had a very different vision. He wanted to strip away much of the dialogue and lean into grand cinematic visuals. Damon and Affleck fought hard to keep their words intact. They weren't looking for a battle epic, they wanted Boston grit and therapy sessions. Ultimately, Gibson passed, admitting he didn't fully get the script. That rejection turned out to be a blessing. By landing with Van Sant, the movie stayed grounded, intimate, and character-driven. What audiences didn't realize was how close the film came to being reshaped into a heavy-handed period drama, robbed of the raw conversational soul that made it timeless. The role of Sean almost went to other stars. Robin Williams' presence defines Good Will Hunting, but he wasn't the first choice. At one point, both Robert De Niro and Morgan Freeman were floated for the role of Sean. Each would have brought a completely different energy. De Niro might have leaned into a harder, streetwise toughness, while Freeman would have played it with calm gravitas. But Miramax fought for Williams, recognizing his ability to fuse warmth and pain in equal measure. It wasn't just casting luck, it was destiny. Williams gave the role a texture no one else could. His mix of humor, sadness, and quiet rage grounded the film. The truth? Without Williams, the therapy scenes might have fallen flat, and the film could have been remembered as a clever indie, not an emotional masterpiece. Matt Damon nearly lost his role to Leonardo DiCaprio. When Miramax greenlit the project, they flirted with replacing Damon as Will. The studio thought Leonardo DiCaprio, then hot off Titanic, would guarantee box office success. Damon was terrified. He had poured years into this script, but Hollywood's obsession with bankable stars threatened to erase him. In the end, Robin Williams reportedly threw his weight behind Damon, saying the film needed authenticity, not just star power. The irony? DiCaprio would later win acclaim for The Basketball Diaries, another troubled youth story, but it was Damon's lived experience of Boston that made Good Will Hunting resonate. If Studio Suits had won, the movie would have felt like an outsider's interpretation instead of a homegrown story. Damon fought for his place, and in doing so, launched a career that Titanic-level fame alone might never have secured. Ben Affleck directed scenes when Van Sant was distracted. Ben Affleck wasn't just co-writer and actor, he sometimes took charge on set. Gus Van Sant, known for his laid-back directing style, occasionally stepped back to observe. In those moments, Affleck guided performances, especially in scenes with neighborhood friends. He had grown up with the rhythms of Boston slang, the nuances of local humor, and he insisted on authenticity. Casey Affleck even joked that Ben was the unofficial assistant director. It wasn't ego, it was survival. Damon and Affleck had fought too hard for their script to let Hollywood sand down the rough edges. Those little interventions, fixing a line reading, adjusting the timing of a joke, kept the film raw. What audiences didn't know is that the movie we cherish today carries Ben Affleck's fingerprints, not just in dialogue, but in its very rhythm and tone. The South Boston locals hated the production. Filming in South Boston was supposed to add authenticity, but locals weren't thrilled. Crews blocked streets, cameras invaded dive bars, and actors took over basketball courts. The neighborhood, protective of its turf, sometimes jeered the cast. Damon and Affleck, being locals themselves, acted as peacemakers. They reminded residents, "This is our story too." Still, tensions flared with stories of equipment being messed with overnight. That gritty backdrop, however, gave the film its realism. You can almost feel the hostility and pride of Southie in every frame. What audiences didn't know was how much of the city pushed back against Hollywood invading their backyard, and yet that resistance made the movie more authentic. And speaking of resistance, go ahead and like and subscribe, because just like Damon and Affleck fighting the system, we're fighting to bring you the untold truth behind cinema's most beloved classics. Stellan Skarsgård was cast by accident. The role of Professor Lambeau almost went to someone else entirely. Stellan Skarsgård wasn't a household name in America in 1997. He had done international films, but Hollywood barely knew him. Gus Van Sant reportedly stumbled upon Skarsgård in a European film and insisted he was perfect. The studio hesitated, wanting a more recognizable name. But Skarsgård's intellectual presence and his ability to mix arrogance with vulnerability won them over. He wasn't just playing a professor, he embodied the flawed academic world the script wanted to critique. His performance gave Will a rival authority figure, one who wasn't abusive but still driven by ego. What audiences didn't realize was that Skarsgård's casting was a roll of the dice, one that grounded the film in realism rather than polished, stereotypical Hollywood authority. Damon and Affleck rehearsed in their mom's basement. Before cameras rolled, Damon and Affleck weren't in fancy studios. They were in Affleck's mother's basement in Cambridge, Massachusetts. That's where they rehearsed scenes, tried out dialogue, and rewrote pages on the fly. They would act out therapy scenes, record themselves, and adjust rhythms until the dialogue felt real. Affleck later joked, "We were basically two kids playing dress-up with a script." But that basement rehearsal gave the film its lived-in feel. By the time they arrived on set, they weren't reciting lines, they were living them. The irony is striking. A movie that won Oscars for Best Writing was shaped in a suburban basement with pizza boxes stacked in the corner. What audiences didn't know was that before Hollywood polish, Good Will Hunting was just two kids grinding it out in a room that smelled like laundry detergent. Minnie Driver almost didn't get the role of Skylar. Miramax executives wanted someone more traditionally Hollywood for the role of Skylar. Minnie Driver, with her British accent and unconventional charm, wasn't their first pick. Executives feared she wasn't glamorous enough to hold the screen opposite Damon, but Damon and Affleck fought back hard. They knew Driver could embody Skylar's intelligence and warmth without cliché. Director Gus Van Sant backed them, and she won the role. The gamble paid off. Driver earned an Oscar nomination for her performance. Still, the tension left scars. In later interviews, Driver admitted she felt like an outsider during the shoot. Ironically, that insecurity added depth to Skylar's scenes where she's fighting for love against Will's guarded walls. What audiences didn't know is how close the studio came to replacing her with a safer starlet, robbing the film of its emotional anchor. The NSA monologue was inspired by real conversations. One of the sharpest moments in the film is Will's takedown of a recruiter, where he explains why he won't work for the NSA. The monologue feels like a political manifesto, and that's because it came directly from Damon and Affleck's late-night conversations. They grew up in Boston, distrustful of government institutions, skeptical of power. They poured that anger into Will's voice. Damon later explained, "That was us venting about what we thought was wrong with the world." The scene struck a chord in the late 1990s when paranoia about government surveillance was rising. What audiences didn't know was that this wasn't just scripted drama. It was Damon and Affleck's worldview, raw and unfiltered, slipped into Will's mouth. It turned a character moment into a generational statement that still resonates in debates about power and morality today. Elliott Smith's music nearly didn't make the cut. The haunting songs of Elliott Smith are inseparable from Good Will Hunting. Miss Misery earned an Oscar nomination and defined the movie's melancholic soul. But Smith almost didn't want to be involved. Known for his reclusive nature, he feared Hollywood would commercialize his music. Damon and Affleck personally reached out, promising the film respected his artistry. Smith agreed, but only reluctantly. During the Oscars, he performed Miss Misery live, dressed in a simple white suit, looking overwhelmed. He later admitted he felt completely out of place. What audiences didn't know is how close the movie came to losing its sonic identity. Without Smith's music, Good Will Hunting would have felt less intimate, less bruised, less human. His songs didn't just accompany the film, they became its emotional bloodstream, forever binding indie music to indie cinema. The famous park bench scene was shot in one afternoon. One of the most iconic moments in Good Will Hunting is the quiet conversation on a park bench between Sean and Will. You'd think such a scene required multiple takes across several days, but it was captured in just one afternoon. Robin Williams delivered his monologue with such weight and precision that Gus Van Sant barely needed another shot. The weather even cooperated. Boston's unpredictable skies held steady long enough for the emotional punch to land. Damon later admitted that he was so mesmerized by Williams's performance that he forgot the camera was rolling. What audiences didn't know was that this pivotal scene, often quoted as the film's heart, wasn't the product of endless rehearsals. It was lightning in a bottle caught in one sitting, proving that sometimes perfection isn't planned, it simply happens. The bar scene with the Harvard student was based on real events. Remember the cocky Harvard student Will embarrasses in front of Skylar? That scene wasn't just good writing, it was personal. Damon and Affleck had encountered their share of arrogant Ivy Leaguers during nights out in Boston. They'd even joked about creating a character who could cut them down with razor-sharp intellect. Damon once said, "That's basically me living out my fantasy of shutting those guys up." The dialogue, quoting obscure texts, dismantling arguments, was sharpened over years of private jokes. When it landed on film, it felt electric, not just a takedown, but a cultural reversal. The working-class kid outsmarting the elite. What audiences didn't know was that the scene was payback, a cathartic release of frustration Damon and Affleck had bottled up for years. On screen, it became myth. Off screen, it was revenge. The ending almost had Will and Skylar breaking up. Good Will Hunting's final scene, Will driving off to see about a girl, is legendary. But the script didn't always end that way. In early drafts, Will and Skylar break up permanently. The story leaned darker, with Will too damaged to accept love. Damon and Affleck wrestled with it, fearing Hollywood might dismiss a bleak ending, but Robin Williams pushed for hope. He told them, "This kid deserves a shot at happiness." Gus Van Sant agreed, and they rewrote the final pages. The result? A closing note of optimism that lifted the entire film. What audiences didn't know was how close the movie came to a devastating finale. Instead of hope, it would have left despair. The ending we got wasn't just sentimental, it was a hard-won victory for hope over cynicism. The crew had to hide Boston's modern skyline. Good Will Hunting was filmed in 1996, but Boston's skyline was already filled with glass towers and modern developments. The problem? The film needed a timeless, working-class feel. The crew often had to carefully frame shots to avoid skyscrapers, billboards, or construction cranes. In some cases, they even used parked trucks to block backgrounds. One famous shot outside Will's neighborhood required hours of repositioning to hide signs of gentrification. It wasn't just logistics, it was storytelling. The Boston of Good Will Hunting isn't tourist-friendly. It's raw, gritty, and still hanging onto its working-class roots. What audiences didn't know was that the film's authentic look was an illusion, crafted by cinematographers fighting against a rapidly changing city. The Boston on screen was as much a character as Will himself, but it was a disappearing one. The Oscars night turned into a surreal dream. When Damon and Affleck won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay, they bounded onto the stage like kids who had snuck into a party, but behind the joy was shock. No one thought two unknowns in their 20s would beat seasoned veterans. Damon later admitted, "I barely remember it. I was in a daze." Robin Williams, who won Best Supporting Actor that night, reportedly grabbed Damon and said, "Your lives just changed forever." What audiences didn't know was that the win wasn't just about a movie, it was a cultural reset. Hollywood suddenly had to take young, unproven writers seriously. The industry's doors blew open for Damon and Affleck, but the chaos of instant fame was just beginning. That Oscar night was the dream come true, but also the start of a storm. A hidden tribute to Boston is carved into the film. In the film, Will and his friends hang out at a bar called the L Street Tavern. To most viewers, it's just another Boston dive, but to locals, it's a landmark. Damon and Affleck chose it deliberately because it was their real hangout. The production didn't redecorate much. What you see on screen is how the tavern actually looked. To this day, the bar remains a pilgrimage site for fans, with photos of Damon, Affleck, and Williams still on display. What audiences didn't know is that the film quietly immortalized a piece of South Boston history. It wasn't just set dressing, it was home. Good Will Hunting preserved not only a story, but also a place, forever locking the authenticity of Southie into cinematic memory. Good Will Hunting wasn't just a movie about a janitor who turned out to be a genius. It was a battle cry from two young dreamers who refused to let Hollywood erase their voice. Through chaos, improvisation, and sheer stubbornness, Damon and Affleck carved their truth onto the screen. And that truth still echoes today. If you loved uncovering these hidden stories, hit that like button, subscribe, and join us for more secrets Hollywood never wanted you to know. Because as Will might say, you're not perfect. But this story, it's pretty damn close.